I began dating my elementary school pen pal. Okay, so I need to tell someone about this because I'm literally sitting in a coffee shop shaking, and I might be about to ruin the most beautiful thing that's ever happened to me. Last month I matched with this guy Roy on Hinge, and when I saw his smile, I swear my heart did this weird flip thing like it recognized him somehow. We started talking, and he used these dorky smiley faces with dots for eyes, and spelled definitely wrong, and suddenly I was 12 years old again reading letters from my pen pal, and oh my god, it was him. We'd written to each other for 3 years through this school program, and I'd kept every single letter in a shoebox covered in Lisa Frank stickers because I was that girl who fell in love with a boy made of words and doodles. When we met in person, I was terrified it would be awkward, but he walked in carrying his own shoebox of letters. His eyes were exactly the warm brown I'd imagined when he wrote about camping with his dad. We spent hours reading our old letters out loud, and his laugh was even better than I'd imagined all those nights when I was 13 writing him secrets by flashlight. He'd written that he wanted to be an astronaut, and now he teaches 5th grade. The way he talked about his students made my chest ache with how good he was. We were falling into something that felt like coming home and finding an adventure all at once. He made me forget that 6 months ago I was supposed to marry someone else who shattered me into pieces. With Roy, I felt like that girl again, who believed love could be as simple as finding the right words to send across the miles. We discovered we'd both written time capsule letters to be opened at 30, and his birthday was in 2 months. And the way he looked at me when he suggested we open them together made me feel like maybe fairy tales were real after all. Then I found out he'd kept one letter he never sent, where a 13-year-old him confessed he was crazy about me, and I ugly cried in the middle of Starbucks because this beautiful man had been loving me since before we knew what love was. We started leaving each other new letters everywhere like we were making up for all the years we'd lost. I'd find them under my windshield or in my mailbox and fall in love with him all over again every single day. But then I messed everything up. I gave Roy my shoebox to hold on to, and he found this letter I never sent where I'd written about having a crush on stupid Jessie from science class, and how maybe I should stop writing to Roy because Jessie was real and Roy was just words on paper. I genuinely thought I had thrown that out a long time ago. The look on his face the next time I saw him absolutely destroyed me, like I'd taken every beautiful thing we'd built and lit it on fire. I tried to explain that I was 13 and confused, and that I never even went to that dance with Jessie, but Roy just kept staring at the letter like it was proof that what we had wasn't special. He said maybe he'd just been my backup plan all along and that he was in love with a girl who never existed. I wanted to scream in that moment, because why couldn't he see that the girl who chose him over everyone for 15 years was right there begging him to understand? We fought, and he said maybe 13-year-old me was right and left. A week later was his birthday, and I sat at the restaurant we planned to meet at for over an hour. I looked at my time capsule letter and realized he wasn't coming. I became terrified that we'd never open them together. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept looking at the door. The barista kept giving me pity looks, and I just desperately needed him to walk through that door and choose us the way I've been choosing him since I was 12 years old. I remember hearing the door chime and my whole body freezing up, because I knew that if I looked up and it wasn't him, it would have meant the end of everything. And if I looked up and saw that it was him, I might break anyway. I looked up. Roy stood in the doorway clutching a manila envelope against his chest, his eyes red and puffy like he'd been crying for hours. The coffee shop sounds faded to nothing as we stared at each other across the room. My hands gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. He took 3 steps forward, then stopped, then took 2 more. The envelope in his hands shook slightly. I wrote you something, he said, his voice cracking on the last word. He held out the envelope, and I saw my name written across it in his handwriting, the same careful letters I'd memorized at 13. I reached for it with trembling fingers, but he pulled it back slightly. Wait, first, can we? He gestured to the chair across from me. I nodded, unable to form words. He sat down and placed the envelope between us on the table. Through the coffee shop window, I watched people walking by living their normal lives while mine balanced on the edge of this moment. Roy's hand moved toward the envelope, then pulled back, then moved forward again. I spent the last 3 days writing letters to you, he said, dozens of them, trying to find the right words to explain what you mean to me, what you've always meant to me. I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up his hand. Please, let me get this out. He pushed the envelope across the table to me. But first, I think we should open our time capsules together, like we planned. My breath caught. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out 2 weathered envelopes, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. One had his name in my purple pen. The other had my name in his blocky print. You came, I whispered. I'm sorry I'm late. I sat in my car outside for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage. He set the time capsule letters on the table next to his new letter. I kept thinking about that 13-year-old girl who wrote me every week for 3 years, who drew hearts in the margins and told me about her dreams. My vision blurred with tears. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own time capsule letter, setting it next to his. 4 letters sat between us now, representing 15 years of words unsaid. Together? He asked. I nodded. We reached for our teenage letters at the same time. My fingers fumbled with the age tape while Roy carefully peeled his open. The coffee shop bustled around us, but we existed in our own bubble of held breath and careful movements. I unfolded my letter first, written in purple pen on notebook paper. My hands shook as I read my 13-year-old handwriting out loud. Dear future me, I hope by the time you read this, you've traveled to all the places Roy and I talked about visiting. I hope you still write stories. I hope you're brave enough to tell people how you feel instead of keeping everything inside. And I hope I marry my pen pal Roy someday, because he's the only boy who makes me feel like I can be myself. The last words came out as a sob. I looked up to find Roy staring at his own letter, tears streaming down his face. Read yours, I whispered. He cleared his throat. Dear future me at 30, I hope you became an astronaut, or at least someone who helps kids dream big. I hope Dad is proud of the man you became. I hope you found someone who laughs at your bad jokes and doesn't mind that you can't spell definitely. I hope she has dark hair and loves to read and uses purple pens. I hope she draws hearts when she's happy and writes stories about adventure. I hope she's kind and funny and makes you feel like you can tell her anything. I hope she's exactly like your pen pal, because even though I'm only 13, I think she might be the one. We sat in silence, our teenage selves' words hanging between us. Roy reached across the table and took my hand. Every single thing I wrote about my future wife was you, he said. Even at 13, I knew. Roy, about that Jessie letter. No, he squeezed my hand. I need to apologize. I let my insecurity poison something beautiful. You were 13. You were allowed to have crushes and doubts and confusion. anything. What matters is that you kept writing to me. You kept choosing us. I ugly cried again, not caring that the barista was definitely watching. Roy came around the table and pulled me into his arms. I breathed in his familiar scent and felt 13 years old and 28 all at once. Read my new letter, he murmured into my hair. Please. I pulled back and opened the manila envelope with shaking hands. Inside were 3 pages covered in his handwriting. Dear Peggy, I read aloud. I've started this letter 17 times. Each time I try to find the perfect words, just like I did when we were kids. But maybe that's the point. With you, I'm still that 13-year-old boy who spent hours crafting the perfect letter. You make me want to be better with words, better with feelings, better with everything. I had to stop to wipe my eyes. Roy's hand found mine again. These 3 days without you have been the longest of my life, longer than the years we spent apart, because now I know what it's like to hold you, to hear your laugh in person, to see the way your nose crinkles when you're trying not to cry. I know what I almost lost, because I let fear win. My nose was definitely crinkling as I continued reading. You asked me to see that you've been choosing me for 15 years, but Peggy, I need you to see that I've been choosing you too. Every relationship that didn't work out, it was because they weren't you. Every time I taught my students about letter writing, I thought of you. Every time I saw purple ink, I smiled. You weren't my backup plan. You were my only plan. I just took a really long detour to find my way back to you. The last page was different. Instead of paragraphs, there were bullet points. Reasons I choose our present over any perfect past. You still use purple pens. You still draw hearts when you're happy. You keep love letters in shoeboxes. You believe in fairy tales, but also in real love. You see the boy I was and the man I am. You make me want to write bad poetry. You're my pen pal, my best friend, and the love of my life. At the bottom, he'd drawn one of his dorky smiley faces. I looked up to find him watching me with those warm brown eyes. I love you, I said. I've loved you since you were just words on paper, and I love you even more now that you're real. I love you too. Always have. He pulled out a small box from his pocket. My heart stopped. But when he opened it, instead of a ring, there were 2 fountain pens, one purple and one black. I thought we could start a new tradition, he said. 1 letter to each other every year on our anniversary. Real letters like we used to write. Our anniversary? Well, we'll have to pick a date. Maybe the day we first wrote to each other, February 15th. I laughed through my tears. You remember the exact date? I remember everything about you, Peggy. He took the purple pen and placed it in my hand. So what do you say? Want to be pen pals again? Yes, I said. To all of it. To everything. To forever. He kissed me then, right there in the coffee shop, with our teenage dreams and adult realities spread across the table. When we pulled apart, I noticed the barista wiping her eyes. So, Roy said, I had one more surprise, but it can wait if you need time to. No more waiting, I said. We've waited 15 years. He grinned and pulled out his phone, showing me a photo. It was a mock-up of a wedding invitation, designed to look like notebook paper with purple and black ink. At the top, instead of formal script, our names were written in the same handwriting we'd used as kids. And in the corner, 2 dorky smiley faces with dots for eyes. Too much? He asked, suddenly uncertain. I grabbed his face and kissed him again. It's perfect. You're perfect. We're perfectly imperfect together. We spent the next hour in that coffee shop, planning a wedding that would honor both the kids we were and the adults we'd become. Roy showed me sketches of centerpieces made from vintage letters and told me about his idea for guests to write us letters instead of a traditional guest book. As we talked, I kept touching the purple pen, thinking about all the letters we'd write over the years, arguments we'd solve through words, celebrations we'd commemorate in ink, children we'd teach to value the written word. Hey, Roy said suddenly, we should probably tell our families we're engaged. I laughed. Engaged? You haven't actually proposed yet. He stood up, then dropped to one knee right there in the coffee shop. The barista actually squealed. Peggy, my pen pal, my love, my future wife who I apparently described perfectly when I was 13. Will you marry me? Yes, I said. Obviously. Definitely yes. I spelled that right, he said proudly. As we left the coffee shop hand in hand, our letters tucked safely in Roy's jacket, I thought about the girl I was 6 months ago, shattered and lost. She never could have imagined this moment, but the 13-year-old me, she knew all along. Sometimes the best love stories start with dear friend and end with dear husband. Sometimes they take 15 years and thousands of miles to unfold. And sometimes they begin again in a coffee shop, with shaking hands and perfect words and the courage to choose love over fear. Roy squeezed my hand as we walked to our cars. So, pen pal, ready to write our next chapter? Already started, I said, holding up the purple pen. Dear Roy, today you made me believe in fairy tales again. We drove separately to Roy's apartment, windows down despite the October chill, both of us giddy with the kind of joy that makes you want to shout at strangers. I followed his car through familiar streets that suddenly looked different, brighter somehow, like the whole world had shifted into better focus. At red lights, I caught him watching me in his rearview mirror, and we'd both start laughing for no reason at all. His apartment smelled like coffee and old books, exactly how I'd imagined it would. While he made tea, I wandered around touching things, the stack of student papers on his desk, the astronomy books on his shelves, the framed photo of him with his dad on a camping trip. Everything felt like discovering pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve since I was 12. I should call my mom, I said, pulling out my phone. She's going to lose her mind when she finds out I'm marrying my pen pal. Roy wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Mine too. She kept all your letters, you know, made copies and put them in a scrapbook. I turned to face him, incredulous. She did not. She did. Said she knew you were special because I'd never written that much in my entire life combined. He kissed my forehead. Want to call them together? Put it on speaker? We settled onto his couch, our phones between us, and I dialed my mom first. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with concern. Peggy, honey, are you okay? You haven't returned my calls since. Mom, I'm engaged. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. Silence. Then, what? To who? Peggy, you just broke up with. To Roy, my pen pal Roy from middle school. We found each other again, and Mom, he kept all my letters and I kept all his, and we're getting married. More silence. I could practically hear her processing. The boy from the writing program? The one who couldn't spell? Roy laughed. Hi, Mrs. Chen. I've gotten better at spelling, mostly. Roy, is that really you? My mom's voice went soft. Oh my goodness. Peggy cried for weeks when you stopped writing. My face burned. Mom, she did the same, Roy said, squeezing my hand. According to my mom's scrapbook, we spent the next hour on rotating phone calls, telling the story again and again. Roy's mom actually screamed when we told her, then demanded we come for dinner immediately. My dad got choked up and mumbled something about keeping my letters safe all these years, just in case. Roy's younger sister Victoria demanded to be a bridesmaid and started listing color schemes before we could respond. respond. By the time we hung up, the sun was setting, painting Roy's living room in shades of gold. I curled into his side, feeling like I could float away if he wasn't anchoring me to the couch. I need to tell Frank, I said suddenly. Frank, my older brother, who'd teased me mercilessly about my pen pal phase, who'd called Roy my imaginary boyfriend until I'd thrown a book at his head. The infamous Frank, Roy said. The one who tried to read your letters? You remember that? I remember everything you told me. He pulled out his phone. Call him. I want to meet the guy who made 13-year-old you so mad she considered putting glue in his shampoo. Frank answered with his usual grunt. Peggy, finally. Mom's been worried sick. I'm engaged, I said without preamble. Again? Jesus, Peg, maybe take a break to my pen pal from middle school. The silence stretched so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, you're joking. His name is Roy. You used to call him my imaginary boyfriend. Holy shut. Frank never swore. The kid with the weird smiley faces? Roy leaned toward the phone. They're not weird. They're vintage. Is that him? Oh my god, this is insane. Peggy, do you remember when you made that whole presentation about how pen pals were better than real boys? I buried my face in Roy's shoulder. I was 13, with a whole poster board, with graphs. Frank was laughing now. The deep belly laugh I rarely heard anymore. Wait until I tell Lisa. She's going to die. We still quote that presentation. Lisa, Frank's wife, grabbed the phone. Peggy, is this real? The pen pal? The one you were going to marry and have 3 kids and a dog named Cosmo with? Roy raised an eyebrow at me. Cosmo? I was really into space because you wanted to be an astronaut, I mumbled. The calls continued. Friends who remembered my pen pal phase, cousins who'd helped me pick out special stationery, my college roommate who'd listened to me drunkenly wonder what happened to my first love. Each conversation made it more real, weaving our past and present together with the voices of everyone who'd witnessed our story from the outside. Later, we ordered Chinese food and sat on Roy's floor, spreading out all our letters chronologically. We created a timeline of our younger selves, watching how our handwriting evolved, how our dreams shifted, how our connection deepened with each envelope. Look, Roy pointed to a letter from 8th grade. This is where you told me about wanting to be a teacher. I wrote back that we could work at the same school. I found his response, written in blue ink that had faded to gray. You drew a picture of our classrooms next to each other. Still can't draw, he said, tracing the lopsided rectangles, but the sentiment holds up. We read until our eyes burned, until the takeout boxes were empty and the tea was cold. I found the letter where Roy first mentioned his dad's cancer diagnosis, the words careful and halting. He found the one where I told him about my parents' divorce scare, purple tear stains still visible on the paper. We told each other everything, I said, amazed at the trust between 2 kids who'd never met. We still can, Roy said. That doesn't have to change. Around midnight, I helped him put the letters back in chronological order, handling them like the treasures they were. As we worked, Roy told me about the years after we'd stopped writing, how he'd looked for me online when Facebook became a thing, how he'd thought about reaching out 100 times but never knew what to say. I dated other people, he said quietly, but I compared every relationship to what we had. None of them felt as real as what we shared through letters. I understood. My ex-fiancé had proposed with a flash mob at a baseball game, surrounded by thousands of strangers. It had felt like performing happiness rather than experiencing it. With Roy, happiness was quiet and certain, like finding a perfect sentence after struggling with words. We were putting the last letters away when Roy's phone buzzed. His sister Victoria, texting at nearly 1 in the morning. Roy read it and his face went pale. What's wrong? I asked. He showed me the screen. Did you know Mom invited Aunt Helen to dinner tomorrow? The one who thinks everything is a scam? I'd heard about Aunt Helen in letters. Roy's father's sister who believed the moon landing was fake and that pen pal programs were government surveillance. 13-year-old Roy had been terrified she'd convince his parents to make him stop writing. She's gotten worse, Roy said, scrolling through Victoria's texts. Apparently she's convinced Mom that people who meet online are all catfishing each other. But we didn't meet online. We met through school. Try explaining that to someone who thinks the internet is trying to steal her thoughts. He rubbed his face. She's going to make dinner miserable. She always does. I took his phone and set it aside. Then we'll handle it together. What's she going to do? Convince us we don't actually know each other. Roy laughed, but it sounded forced. You don't know Aunt Helen. She could convince you the sky isn't blue if you give her enough time. We went to bed. Me in Roy's room, him on the couch despite my protests, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Aunt Helen, about the fragility of our newfound happiness. How many obstacles had kept us apart for 15 years? How many more were waiting? The next morning, Roy made pancakes while I sorted through more letters, finding ones we'd missed the night before. I was reading a particularly sweet one from 9th grade when Roy's mom called. Just warning you, she said, her voice tight. Helen arrived early. She's already started. Started what? Roy asked. She found your scrapbook. She's convinced the whole pen pal thing was a scam to harvest children's information. She's been Googling Peggy's name for an hour. Roy and I exchanged glances. Mom, that's insane. I know that. You know that. But she's got your cousin Alexander worried now too. He thinks maybe you should run a background check. A background check? Mom, I've known Peggy since we were 12. Through letters, honey. Helen's point is that anyone can write letters. After she hung up, Roy slumped against the counter. I'm sorry. My family's not usually this. Hey. I stood and wrapped my arms around him. Every family has their own version of crazy. Remember when I told you about my Uncle Frank who thought the government was reading his mail? The one who wrote everything in code? For 6 months, all his Christmas cards looked like random numbers. I kissed his cheek. We survived that. We'll survive Aunt Helen. But as we drove to his parents' house that afternoon, I felt my confidence wavering. What if Aunt Helen found something online that made me look bad? What if she twisted our beautiful story into something suspicious? Roy's childhood home was a modest 2-story in the suburbs, with a garden that had seen better days and a front door that stuck when you tried to open it. His mom met us at the door, her face apologetic. She's in the living room with your father's photo albums, she whispered. She's decided the whole pen pal program was suspicious because the school doesn't run it anymore. Because of budget cuts, Roy said through gritted teeth. I know, sweetheart, just try to be patient. We walked into the living room to find a woman in her 60s with Roy's eyes but none of his warmth, surrounded by photo albums and printouts from various websites. She looked up when we entered, her gaze zeroing in on me with laser focus. So, she said without preamble, you're the pen pal. Hi, Aunt Helen, I said, forcing a smile. I'm Peggy. It's nice to finally... Is that even your real name? She held up a printout. Because I found 3 different Peggy Chens in the state, and none of them match your age. Roy stepped forward. Aunt Helen, please, I'm protecting you, she snapped. Do you know how many people create fake identities? How many scammers target lonely children through school programs? We were 12, I said, trying to keep my voice level. What kind of scam targets 12-year-olds through handwritten handwritten letters. The long con, she said seriously. Build trust early, disappear for years, then reappear when there's something to gain. Like what? Roy's voice was rising. What could Peggy possibly gain from, you have a steady job, a pension, your father's life insurance, that's enough. Roy's mom entered carrying a tea tray, her hands shaking slightly. Helen, these children found each other again by chance. It's romantic, not suspicious. Aunt Helen turned to her. Sandy, you're too trusting. Did you verify any of this? Did you check if her stories match what she wrote as a child? Actually, I said, an idea forming. You can. Check, I mean. We have all the letters, both sides of our correspondence. You can read them yourself. Roy looked at me in alarm, but I squeezed his hand. Aunt Helen's eyes narrowed. You could have forged them recently. With aged paper and faded ink? I pulled out my phone. Look, here's a photo of my shoebox from high school. My friend took it for a photography project in 2011. You can see the letters inside. I showed her the photo, then pulled up my friend's old photography blog where it was posted with a date stamp. Aunt Helen studied it suspiciously. This proves nothing. You could have been planning this for years. Victoria entered the room carrying a worn scrapbook. Oh my god, Aunt Helen, would you listen to yourself? Look, she opened the scrapbook to a page of photocopied letters. Mom copied every letter Peggy sent. Look at the handwriting. Look at the little hearts she drew. A 12-year-old girl drew those hearts, not some mastermind scammer. Don't be naive, Victoria. Children can be groomed to— Stop. Roy's voice was sharp. Aunt Helen, I know you think you're helping, but you're not. You're trying to ruin the best thing that's ever happened to me because you can't believe that sometimes good things just happen. Good things don't just happen, Aunt Helen said. There's always a catch, always an angle. What happened to you? Roy's mom asked quietly. When did you become so convinced the world was out to get you? Aunt Helen's face flickered with something. Pain, maybe, or old hurt, but then it hardened again. I'm trying to protect this family. If you won't do it, I will. She pulled out another stack of papers. I did a deep dive online. This Peggy Chen was engaged 6 months ago to someone else. What kind of person gets engaged twice in 6 months? My stomach dropped. Roy's hand tightened around mine. Someone who realized she was with the wrong person, I said quietly. Someone who found her actual soulmate. Soulmate? Aunt Helen laughed bitterly. You children and your fairy tales. Let me tell you what really happened. You got dumped, you were vulnerable, and you hunted down your old pen pal because you remembered he had a crush on you. Easy target. That's not— You probably searched for him online, found out he was single, stable, the kind of guy who'd fall for nostalgia. Then you created a profile on whatever dating app he used and made sure he'd find you. We matched randomly, Roy said, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Nothing's random online, Aunt Helen said triumphantly. These apps use algorithms. She could have figured out how to game the system. The room fell silent. I could feel everyone looking at me, could see the tiny seed of doubt Aunt Helen had planted starting to grow. Even Roy's mom looked uncertain now. You know what? I stood up, my whole body shaking. You're right. I did look for Roy online. Not 6 months ago, but on and off for 15 years. Every time I joined a new social media platform, I searched for him. Not because I was planning some elaborate con, but because I missed my friend. Because I wondered if he still drew those silly smiley faces, and if he ever became an astronaut. I turned to Roy, tears burning my eyes. I didn't hunt you down. I didn't manipulate algorithms. I swiped right on a guy with a nice smile and then nearly had a heart attack when I realized it was you. And if you believe her, if you think I'm capable of faking 15 years of feelings, then maybe she's right. Maybe this is too good to be true. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, but Roy caught my arm. Don't, he said. Please don't leave. Your aunt thinks I'm a con artist. My aunt thinks the mailman is spying on her. He turned to face Helen. You want to know what I think? I think you're jealous. I think you're so bitter and lonely that you can't stand seeing other people happy. You've spent so much time looking for lies that you can't recognize truth when it's right in front of you. Roy, his mom started. No, Mom, I'm done being patient. Aunt Helen, you want proof that Peggy's real? That this is real? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through it. Here's the email I sent my best friend the night we matched, before we even messaged each other. I wrote, I just matched with a girl who looks exactly like how I imagined my pen pal would look. Same smile, same eyes. I'm probably crazy, but I have to message her. He showed the email to the room, dated a month ago. And here's his response telling me I was overthinking it, that there was no way it was actually her. But I knew. Some part of me knew before she even mentioned the letters. Alexander, who'd been quiet in the corner, suddenly spoke up. Wait, I remember that night. You called me freaking out about some girl on Hinge. You kept saying it felt like fate or something. Because it was, Roy said firmly. Not everything is a conspiracy, Aunt Helen. Sometimes people who are meant to find each other actually do. Aunt Helen stood, gathering her papers. When this falls apart, when she shows her true colors, don't come crying to me. I won't, Roy said. Because in 50 years, when Peggy and I are still writing each other letters and you're still alone with your conspiracy theories, I'll be too happy to care what you think. She left in a huff, slamming the door behind her. The room stayed quiet for a moment, then Victoria started slow clapping. Finally, she said. Someone stood up to her. Roy's mom sank into a chair. I'm so sorry, Peggy. She's always been difficult, but lately, it's okay, I said, though my hands were still shaking. Every family has one. Still, she stood and hugged me tightly. Welcome to the family, sweetheart. The sane parts of it anyway. The rest of dinner was subdued but warm. Victoria peppered us with wedding questions, while Alexander sheepishly admitted he'd been worried for about 5 minutes before remembering that Aunt Helen also thought birds were government drones. Roy's mom brought out photo albums, the real ones, not the ones Helen had been rifling through, and showed me pictures of young Roy that matched perfectly with how I'd imagined him. Look, she pointed to one photo. This was right after he got your first letter. He was so excited he wore the envelope in his pocket for a week. Mom, Roy groaned, but he was smiling. And here, she flipped pages. This was the day you stopped writing. He wouldn't come out of his room for 3 days. I studied the photo. Teenage Roy. No longer the boy I'd written to, but not yet the man beside me. He looked lost, and I recognized the expression because I'd worn it too. I'm sorry, I whispered. For what? Roy asked. For disappearing. For not fighting harder to keep writing. For all the years we lost. Hey, he tilted my chin up. We found each other again. That's what matters. As we drove back to Roy's apartment that night, I thought about Aunt Helen's accusations, not because I believed them, but because they highlighted how improbable our story really was. What were the odds of randomly matching with your childhood pen pal on a dating app? What were the chances that both of us had saved every letter? That we'd both written time capsule letters confessing our feelings? That we'd both spent 15 years comparing everyone else to a ghost made of words? You're thinking too loud, Roy said, glancing at me at a red light, just processing everything. Aunt Helen, among other things. I twisted the purple pen in my hand. hands. Do you think she had a point about how unlikely this all is? Roy pulled into his parking spot and turned to face me. You know what's unlikely? That two kids from different states would connect so deeply through letters that they'd remember each other 15 years later, that they'd both save every single letter, that they'd match on an app designed for superficial swiping based on a few photos, that they'd both be single at the exact right time. He took my hand. But you know what? Unlikely things happen every day. People win the lottery. They survive impossible accidents. They find their birth parents after decades of searching. And sometimes, if they're really lucky, they find their way back to their first love. When you put it like that, Peggy, I don't care if it's likely or unlikely. I don't care if Aunt Helen thinks it's a conspiracy or if the whole world thinks we're crazy. I care that when I saw your face on that app, my heart recognized you before my brain did. I care that holding your hand feels like coming home. I care that we're here, now, choosing each other. I kissed him then, pouring all my certainty into it. When we pulled apart, I said, we should write Aunt Helen a thank you letter. For what? For reminding me that what we have is worth fighting for, even against conspiracy theorists. Roy laughed. Only you would want to write a thank you letter to someone who accused you of being a con artist. Well, I said, grinning, I did fall in love with a boy through letters. Clearly I have a thing for written communication. We went inside and Roy made hot chocolate while I browsed his bookshelf. I found a worn copy of The Little Prince and smiled, remembering how we'd both written essays about it in 8th grade, comparing our favorite quotes in letters that took 2 weeks to arrive. Hey, I said suddenly, we should go to the school, the one where the pen pal program started, see if they have any records or photos from our year. Roy looked up from the stove. That's actually a great idea. We could use them for the wedding. Maybe even invite our old teachers. Mrs. Patterson, I exclaimed. She was the one who paired us up. She said she matched students based on their writing samples and interests, so we weren't random even then, Roy mused. A teacher saw something compatible in two 12-year-olds' essays and changed our entire lives. We spent the rest of the night planning our visit to the school, looking up teachers online, debating whether it was weird to invite them to our wedding. Roy found Mrs. Patterson's retirement announcement from 5 years ago, complete with a photo of her surrounded by students. We should write to her, I said. Tell her what happened, how her pen pal program led to this. Another letter? Roy teased. At this rate, we'll need a second wedding just for all the thank you notes. But he was already pulling out paper and pens, and we spent the next hour crafting the perfect letter to the teacher who'd unknowingly played matchmaker to two kids who wouldn't meet for 15 years. As I watched Roy write, his handwriting still endearingly messy, I thought about all the letters we'd write in our lifetime. Not just the anniversary ones we'd promised, but grocery lists and love notes and reminders stuck to the fridge. A whole life built on words, starting with Dear Pen Pal and continuing forever. What are you smiling about? Roy asked, looking up from the letter. Just thinking about how Aunt Helen was wrong. I didn't con you into falling for me. I moved closer, reading over his shoulder. You've been falling for me one letter at a time since we were 12. I just finally gave you my address. The next morning, I woke up to find Roy already at his desk, writing furiously. Scattered around him were crumpled papers and his laptop showed multiple tabs of wedding venues. He looked up when I entered, dark circles under his eyes. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Started planning and then Victoria texted me at 3 a.m. I picked up his phone to see a string of messages. My stomach dropped as I read them. Victoria had overheard their mom on the phone with Aunt Helen, who was apparently calling relatives to warn them about the scammer who trapped poor Roy. She's really doing this? I sank onto the couch, feeling the weight of it all. Roy came to sit beside me. Mom's trying to do damage control, but Helen's already convinced my great aunt Martha and two cousins that you're after my teacher's pension. We spent the morning fielding calls from confused relatives. Roy's cousin Bethany called to ask if I'd stolen his identity. His uncle Ted wanted to know if I'd been arrested before. Each conversation chipped away at our joy from the night before. By noon, we decided to visit Mrs. Patterson ourselves rather than write. Roy found her address through the school district's retirement newsletter. She lived 40 minutes away in a small ranch house with a garden full of butterflies. She answered the door with flower in her gray hair and the same kind smile I remembered from her photo. Can I help you? Mrs. Patterson, I'm Roy Martinez. You ran the Pen Pal program at Jefferson Middle School 15 years ago. Her eyes lit up. Oh my goodness, I remember that program. Best thing I ever did for those kids. Come in, come in. Her living room was filled with thank you cards from former students. She served us lemonade and shortbread cookies while we told our story. Her eyes misted when we showed her our old letters. I knew it, she said, tapping the coffee table. I spent hours matching students based on their writing samples. You two both wrote about wanting to explore the world, but being afraid to leave home. Both used metaphors about stars and distances. It was perfect. She disappeared into another room and returned with a box labeled Pen Pal Program 2009 to 2012. Inside were photos from the program launch, copies of the initial student essays, and her handwritten matching notes. Here, she pointed to a page. Roy M. and Peggy C. Both introspective writers, similar humor, complementary personalities, high compatibility score. I stared at her careful notes, at the thought she'd put into connecting two kids who lived states apart. You really believed in this program. Letters teach patience, she said. In a world of instant messages, I wanted kids to learn the joy of anticipation, of crafting thoughts carefully. Some parents complained it was old-fashioned, but look at you two now. She photocopied her notes for us and insisted on giving us the original photo from the program launch. Neither Roy nor I were in it, but it showed the bulletin board where our first letters had been posted before mailing. Will you come to our wedding? Roy asked impulsively. Mrs. Patterson clutched her chest. I would be honored. I've been to many student weddings, but never one that started with my Pen Pal program. On the drive back, we stopped at a stationery store. Roy wanted special paper for our wedding invitations, something that honored our history. We spent an hour testing different pens on various papers, laughing when Roy still couldn't spell definitely correctly on the first try. Spell check has ruined me, he said, crossing out another attempt. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank. Mom's freaking out. Some relative of Roy's called to warn her you're a con artist. What's happening? I showed Roy the message. His jaw tightened. This has to stop. We drove to his parents' house, finding his mom in the kitchen, stress baking her fourth batch of cookies. She looked up with flour-dusted hands and worry in her eyes. Helen's called half the family, she said. She's even reached out to your side, Peggy. Found them on social media. My phone started ringing. My mom, my dad, Frank again. Each call brought more confusion, more questions about whether Roy and I were really who we said we were. Enough, Roy said. He grabbed his laptop and started typing. We're going to settle this once and for all. He created a shared document titled The Truth About Roy and Peggy Peggy, a love story in letters. We spent the next 3 hours scanning every letter, every photo, every piece of evidence that our story was real. Mrs. Patterson's notes, the timestamp from my friend's photography blog, Roy's email to his friend the night we matched, screenshots of our first Hinge conversation. We're not defending ourselves, Roy said as he organized everything chronologically. We're just showing the truth. Victoria arrived as we were finishing, bringing Alexander with her. They'd been fielding calls all day too. Alexander looked sheepish as he admitted Aunt Helen had almost convinced him to run a background check on me. She's persuasive, he said. Kept talking about romance scams and lonely teachers being targeted. Where is she now? I asked. Probably at home, Googling more conspiracy theories, Victoria said. She already sent Mom articles about catfishing and a documentary about online predators. Roy shared the document with his entire family email list, CCing mine as well. Within minutes, responses started coming in. His cousin Bethany apologized for doubting. Uncle Ted sent a gif of wedding bells. My mom called to say she was proud of how we handled everything, but Aunt Helen remained silent. The next few days passed in a blur of wedding planning and damage control. We visited venues, tasted cakes, and fielded questions from relatives who'd been poisoned by Helen's suspicions. Some family members remained skeptical, making comments about rushing into things and being careful. Roy threw himself into creating our wedding invitations. He hand-lettered each one, using the same style he'd developed as a kid. I addressed them with purple ink, drawing small hearts in the corners like I used to. Each invitation included a photo of one of our original letters, showing our history to anyone who doubted it. A week before we planned to mail them, I came home to find Roy sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. But these weren't wedding plans or old letters. They were printouts of emails, social media posts, and text messages. What's all this? I asked. Roy looked up, his face grave. I've been thinking about Aunt Helen, about why she's so determined to prove you're fake, so I did some digging. He showed me a Facebook post from 8 years ago. Aunt Helen, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. The caption read, 6 months of happiness with my David. Keep reading, Roy said. The posts tracked a whirlwind romance. David sending flowers, romantic dinners, talk of moving in together. Then suddenly, nothing. Helen's posts became bitter, talking about liars and users. I called my mom, Roy said. Apparently David turned out to be married. He'd been lying the entire time, using Helen for money while his wife was sick. She lost thousands and never recovered emotionally. I sank down beside him. So she thinks everyone's lying because someone lied to her. She's projecting her pain onto us. Roy gathered the papers. I'm going to talk to her. Show her that I understand why she's scared, but that our story isn't hers. I'll come with you. No, he said gently. This is something I need to do alone, family to family. While Roy went to confront his aunt, I visited my parents. My mom had already started planning her outfit for the wedding, and my dad was researching how to preserve letters for future generations. I always kept yours, he said, showing me a box in his office. Every letter you sent from camp, every note you left on the fridge, figured someday they'd matter. Frank arrived with Lisa and their twins. The kids immediately wanted to hear the pen pal story, sitting wide-eyed as I showed them age-appropriate letters Roy and I had exchanged. Will you write us letters, Aunt Peggy? My niece asked. Of course, I said. Real ones, on paper. Frank pulled me aside while Lisa helped the kids write their first letters. I'm sorry I teased you back then. I didn't get it. Get what? That it was real. What you and Roy had. I thought it was just kid stuff, but you two built something that lasted 15 years without even trying. My phone buzzed. Roy, texting that he was on his way back from Helen's. His message was brief. We need to talk. I met him at his apartment, anxiety churning in my stomach. He looked exhausted, but oddly peaceful. How did it go? I asked. Roy pulled out an envelope. Inside was a letter in shaky handwriting I didn't recognize. She wrote this. For you. I unfolded it carefully. Aunt Helen's words were measured. Careful. Peggy, I owe you an apology. Roy showed me your letters, your history, your truth. He also showed me that I've been letting my own pain poison his happiness. I was wrong. Love isn't always a lie, even when mine was. I hope you can forgive a bitter woman who forgot that sometimes good things are simply good things. Helen. She cried, Roy said. I've never seen her cry before. She told me about David, about how she'd believed every word he wrote until she found out none of it was real. What did you say? I told her the difference was that we have 15 years of letters proving we're exactly who we say we are, that you can't fake that kind of history. He pulled me close. She wants to come to the wedding, to make things right. Of course she can come. There's more. Roy pulled out another envelope. She had this, from my dad. Inside was a letter dated 15 years ago, addressed to Helen. Roy's father's handwriting was careful, deliberate. Helen, I know you think the pen pal program is silly, but you should see Roy when he gets a letter from his friend Peggy. He lights up like Christmas morning. I hope he finds her again someday. Some connections are too special to lose. Take care of him if something happens to me. James. We sat in silence, holding his father's words between us. Roy's dad had died when we were 16, just a year after we'd stopped writing. I'd never known he'd been aware of our friendship. He knew, Roy whispered. He knew you were special. The next 2 weeks flew by. We mailed our invitations, each one a small piece of art. The responses poured in, mostly enthusiastic RSVPs covered in hearts and smiley faces. Even Aunt Helen sent hers back with "Wouldn't miss it" written in purple ink. We found a venue, a small garden library where love letters from famous couples were displayed in glass cases. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Victoria took charge of decorations, creating centerpieces from vintage typewriters and old letters. Alexander surprised us by offering to officiate, getting ordained online specifically for our wedding. 3 days before the ceremony, Mrs. Patterson called. She'd been going through more boxes and found something special. The original matching sheet where she'd paired us up, plus a photo of the mailbox where our first letters had been sent. Meant to be, she said simply. The morning of our wedding, I woke to find a letter slipped under my door. Roy's handwriting, as familiar as my own. Dear Peggy, today I marry my pen pal. 13-year-old me would be amazed. 30-year-old me is grateful. Every letter we wrote was a promise we didn't know we were making. See you at the altar. Minus Roy P.S. I definitely spelled that right. The ceremony was small, intimate. Our families filled the garden, Aunt Helen in the front row with tears already streaming. Mrs. Patterson sat beside my parents, clutching her handkerchief. The typewriter centerpieces held cards where guests had written us letters instead of a traditional guest book. Alexander kept the ceremony short but personal, reading excerpts from our teenage letters that had everyone laughing and crying. When it came time for vows, Roy and I had agreed to write them separately, like letters to each other. Dear Roy, I began, my voice shaking. 15 years ago, you were just words on paper. Now you're my whole world written in permanent ink. I promise to keep writing our story, one day day at a time, one letter at a time, forever. Roy's vows were simpler but perfect. Dear Peggy, you taught me that love is patient, that it waits, that it finds a way. I promise to choose you every day, in every word, in every silence between words. You're my favorite story, and I can't wait to write the rest. We exchanged rings engraved with tiny envelope symbols. The kiss was sweet, tasting of promises and purple ink and patient love that waited 15 years to bloom. At the reception, Aunt Helen surprised everyone by standing to speak. I almost ruined this with my fear, she said, but Roy and Peggy's love reminded me that truth is stronger than lies, that real love leaves evidence in every word, every letter, every patient year of waiting. Frank's twins performed a song they'd written about pen pals. Victoria read a letter from Roy's dad she'd found in the attic, where he'd written about hoping his son would find lasting love. Even the barista from the coffee shop where we'd reunited had sent a card, saying we'd restored her faith in romance. As the night wound down, Roy and I snuck away to the library's reading room. Surrounded by love letters from centuries past, we opened one final envelope, a letter we'd written together the night before to be opened on our first anniversary. Think we'll make it? I asked, leaning against his shoulder. Are you kidding? Roy pulled out the purple pen from his pocket. We've got a lifetime of letters to write.